system. At this time, we would like to start assembling the honor table on a very informal sense to listen to our stakeholders. So I'm going to be calling the speakers that are going to be joining us to say a few words before the lecture. So the first guest that I want to introduce to you is Dr. Adam Smith. I would also like to call Dr. Marcelo Horácio, and he's the Executive Medical Director at AstraZeneca. Please welcome. We are so pleased to welcome you to Her Majesty Trade Commissioner and São Paulo Consul General, Mrs. Joanna Krelling, here representing British Embassy. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Tarcísio Eloy Pessoa de Barros Filho, Dean of the University of São Paulo Medical School. Please welcome. Now, our guests are going to say a few words before the lecture.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I think I've got a microphone on. So. Hello, everybody. So the Nobel Media is the media arm of the Nobel Foundation based in Stockholm, Sweden. And on behalf of everybody at the Nobel Foundation, I'd like to welcome you to this lecture, which, as you'll see from the hoardings, is part of the Nobel Prize Inspiration Initiative. That's an initiative that we, Nobel Media, run with AstraZeneca. We've been running it since 2010. We've visited about 50 cities around the world with Nobel laureates on 5 continents. And there are 2 countries we keep coming back to most. One is China, for obvious reasons, and the other is Brazil. We are really delighted to be back here for a 4th time here at the University of São Paulo, and I'd like to thank the medical school and Dean Tarcísio for so warmly welcoming us. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you, Fraser, for giving up your time to be here. It's wonderful. Now, the initiative is all about connecting Nobel laureates with the next generation of scientists. So it's really lovely to see you all here. And because I always like to show Stockholm what's happening, I'd just like to take a photograph of all you young scientists and send it back to Stockholm. So if you would please say Nobel Prize, I shall capture you. Nobel Prize! Nobel Prize. Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. Okay. I encourage you all to ask lots of questions in the Q&A session afterwards. It's a lovely chance to meet Fraser Stoddart in person, so please take advantage of it. Thank you very much indeed.
Good morning, everybody. So, my name is Marcelo Horácio. I'm the medical director for AstraZeneca Latin America. So, first of all, it's really, really a pleasure and an honor to have Professor Fraser here with us. One thing that I like to say, I don't know if everybody knows, but from all the Nobel Prizes, Scotland has 15 of them. So it's amazing how Scotland has contributed to the human as us. And apart from Nobel Prizes, many of the inventions like Fleming, Bell, and everything came from Scotland. So it's some country that can teach us how we can bring science for the future. So the intent of having Nobel Prize here is how us in Brazil need to rethink the model of research and technology, and how it can be like Scotland in the future to have many Nobel Prizes. So first of all, I'm really, really pleased to have Professor here, and wish everybody a great session. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jo Krelin. I'm the Consul General here in São Paulo. I'm actually rather pleased that Brazil is not Scotland. The weather is far worse in Scotland, although today, actually, we seem to have brought Scotland to São Paulo for you. And thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. Thank you very much to Fraser Stoddart for being here. I know we're all looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you very much to the Nobel Prize Inspiration Initiative. It's fantastic to have you here in Brazil again. And huge thanks, of course, to AstraZeneca, our partners, and USP for hosting the event today. So it's a huge pleasure to be here. I won't stay for very long, but I just did want to kind of pick up on a point that Adam made about the kind of the interest and enthusiasm for this initiative and for British science that exists here in Brazil. we are enormous partners. The UK is a huge partner of scientific endeavour in Brazil. We invest a huge amount of money in it, and we love the fact that we have got phenomenal collaborations between British and Brazilian scientists in an enormous number of areas across the whole range of scientific endeavour. We've been celebrating that partnership this year. We've had a year of science and innovation where we've reached over 6,000 people in 68 events in 19 cities in Brazil. It shows the reach and the depth of our partnership between the UK and Brazil. There is something really special that happens when British and Brazilian scientists get together. First of all, it creates a 30% impact, increase in impact when the two countries combine. It's like a sort of alchemy. And if a Brazilian scientist co-authors with a British scientist, they will have the best impact they will have above any other collaboration with any other researcher from any other nation. There is something really marvellous that Brazilians and British scientists, researchers bring when they work together. And I know that collaboration, that openness, that is what scientific endeavour is about, as well as individual genius, and I'm sure we'll be hearing some of that today. But that collaboration, that openness, the openness to different perspectives, the openness to different points of view is something that we must work really hard on together in a world where that feels under threat and under pressure. And we in the UK are committed to do that, particularly with our Brazilian partners. So thank you again, Fraser. I'm really looking forward to hearing you and actually understanding what this is all about. I didn't ask you that last night, but I'm sure it'll be wonderful. Thank you very much.
I am representing the School of Medicine of the University of São Paulo and the Dean of the University of São Paulo that unfortunately could not be here today. He's in a travel and had problems with his flight. So in behalf of the School of Medicine of the University of São Paulo, I would like to say that it's really a great honor, a great pleasure having you here today. I hope we can get together again soon in a lot of different partnerships that could be developed between the University of São Paulo and the invited institution. In a long period, this initiative, I think it should be very, very, very important for development of science in our country, in our institution, and our institution, the School of Medicine of the University of São Paulo, the University of São Paulo, is with open doors for all this kind of collaborative initiative. So thank you again for all of you. And I think that this initiative should be very, very, very important for the new generation that is represented here. Thank you again.
Now it's a great honor to welcome you to the laureate professor, Sir Fraser Stoddart, who has contributed widely to the design and synthesis of molecular machines using molecular recognition and molecular self-assembly processes. Today he will share with us the journey that led to the design and the synthesis of the molecular machines and its applications. Please give your full attention to Professor Sir Fraser Stoddart and help me welcome him to the stage. Please, Professor.
Well, thank you very much for your introduction. It's an absolute delight to be back in Brazil. This is one of the countries I love coming to for all kinds of reasons. I do thank the Dean for his comments, the Consul General for her comments, for the Zeneca participation, that AstraZeneca, which is incredibly important to the sustaining of this activity that we heard Dr. Adam Smith describe to you at the beginning. And I am at least honored to be part of this so-called Nobel Prize Inspiration Initiative. So let me try to do my best to inspire you. Under the title of My Journey to Stockholm. So this all began for me when I was 6 months old on a farm, isolated, nonetheless, within 15 miles of the capital of Scotland, Edinburgh. My father went here with my mother and myself in 1942. We did not own this farm or farmhouse. It was a tenant farm. We paid a rent. This was my bedroom window, from which you could see the farmsteading. This is my father with a sheepdog. You can see a horse trough here. And what I witnessed there was a transformation in agriculture from the horse and cart to the combine harvester in 25 years. So this taught me that you keep up with the times, whatever happens. And my father was very good at demonstrating that to me. So here I am with my parents, and I was an only child, but I had, highly supportive parents nonetheless. They didn't want me to stay on and remain on the farm. They sacrificed a huge amount for my schooling, and this farmhouse, believe it or not, had no electricity until I was 18 years of age. So I was brought up with candles and paraffin lamps. It was a so-called mixed arable farm, which just meant that we reared everything and grew everything that you could in that part of the world. We were very much free to run wild, even though I was an only child, with some other children that worked on the farm, their parents. We had a wonderful time. Inventing games. Risk-taking was encouraged. It is actually surprising that we all survived. The risk-taking was so large. And of course, as I grew up, hard work, but there was always reward for effort, good food. After 3 years at a village school, I went to Edinburgh, which was only 45 minutes away in a bus, to a college called Melville College. And this is me here. This gave me a great general education. I was, of course, not to appreciate how special it was at the time. I just took it for granted. I had terrific teachers. We wore ridiculously red, for the most part, uniforms with a bit of black trim, and sports obviously were emphasized, and there was also a cadet force, so there was a little army training. Subjects that we were exposed to included Latin and French, English language, literature, history, geography, mathematics, and of course physics and chemistry, and a bit of philosophy, and of course music and many other things into the bargain. In 1960, I made my path to Edinburgh University, where I was for the best part of 7 years, taking my first degree and my second degree. This was a wonderful professor at the time, Sir Edmund Hurst. You can see from his photograph, a very gentle, wonderful man. There's a lot here. All I want you to get from this is that these people actually remarkably moved around the country and beyond a huge amount in those days. So you see St Andrews, Manchester, Birmingham, Bristol, Edinburgh, and so forth. And I was part of a very small research group that was researching into gum that came from acacia trees in the Sudan. What were they made up of in terms of principally their carbohydrate component? So I started off more or less as an analytical chemist. Now, when I left Edinburgh in 1967, Sir Edmund said to me, and I never really, at the time he pronounced this statement, got it. It only came later. Whatever you do, Stoddart, tackle a big problem. And I'll come back to that later. And I took off to Canada, Queen's University, Kingston, Ontario, and was part of a somewhat larger research group. You'll notice it's pretty much male-dominated. And there I had 3 years. This was my mentor, Ken Jones. And I was to find out within 4 weeks of arriving that he was going to come to, where do you believe? Brazil. to Curitiba. And it wasn't for 2 weeks, it was for a year. Now, this is 1967. There's no email, there's no really, telephone calls were incredibly costly. We're talking about dollars a second. So, along with the fact that the Canadian Postal Service decided to go on strike for a whole year, we were incommunicado. He was in Curitiba and we were in Kingston, Ontario. So quite an early connection with Brazil. And this gave me a huge amount of independence. And so with Hearst, tackle a big problem ringing in my ears, I went to the library in the chemistry department, and in the middle of April 1967 opened up an article by somebody no one had ever heard of, Charles Pedersen. And you can see he was to share the Nobel Prize in 1967 with 2 other people. And the reason for this was that he had announced the discovery, synthesis of large rings. And this flew in the face of all my teaching at Edinburgh. You could make small rings, 5, 6, and 7, but forget about 18-membered rings, which is what we have here. Pedersen changed the whole world in that respect. And so I got hooked on, let's make big rings. And being Fraser Stoddart, I thought, well, let's make a 30-membered ring. Let's make a 35-membered ring in 3 steps from 2 natural products. And another person I want to introduce at this stage is Saul Winstein. And this will illustrate that actually, as scientists, we live in a village. You have an interaction with somebody when you're in your 20s, and you'll find out later that when I'm 55, I go and become the Winstein Chair at UCLA. Who was to know that that was going to happen? Anyway, the tragedy about Saul Winstein was, although he was a McRae lecturer at Queen's in the spring of 1969, he returned to Los Angeles and had a heart attack in his swimming pool in November of that year and died. As quite a relatively young man. Okay, so something I started at Queen's and finished at the University of Sheffield, where eventually I had my first academic appointment, was a book on the stereochemistry, the shape of carbohydrates, published in 1971. As I say, it was finished at Sheffield, and I had found at this time some very, very supportive scientists in the United States, and this was to determine my future in many ways. The great support that I got from, for example, a stereochemist, Ernest Elio. But back at home base, unfortunately, my immediate professor was incredibly, I had to work out, resentful of anything that was achieved by young people. And so this has had a psychological effect on me for the rest of time. It was a very difficult time. In fact, there were 4 professors, and it was like baronial England. They were at war with each other, morning, noon, and night. There would be overnight coups, and there would be a different head of department almost every other month. It was not a pleasant time. And I didn't get any help as far as graduate students were concerned until I was 2 years in. Teaching was stressful and challenging, but we did manage to begin some research. And here is the segue from my experience as a carbohydrate chemist to taking up the teachings of Charles Pedersen. So here you can see this 18-membered ring that he brought into being, and on either side these are carbohydrates. I'm not going to go into the detail. The story is that I married my carbohydrates with these. Why? You're frightened I fall. Oh, okay. You're so kind. This is the whole story of Brazil. You think of your guests above all. Okay, so you'll like this because I was very passionate, even though these were difficult times, about my science. So here back in Edinburgh, and this is my elder daughter Fiona and my younger daughter Alice, and she would be about 6 and 3. And this is Fiona. My father at his most creative, Sandcastle Molecules, Portobello Beach, Edinburgh, round about 1979. And there you can see, there is the crown ether, there's the carbohydrate, and this blue bucket in the middle is a potassium ion, yeah? So I'm really playing science on the beach with my daughters, okay? Also, here's a quote, I think, that tells you a couple that despite these first 8 years at Sheffield being less than easy, I still am fired up by passion. And of course, Jack Kennedy and then his brother Robert, who ran for office but was sadly assassinated. Robert Kennedy was going around the United States when I was in Canada trying to get to the US presidency. And these are words from George Bernard Shaw, the Irish playwright. Some men see things as they are and say, why? I dream things that never were and ask, why not? Great line, I think, or two. And then another of my heroes, Nobel laureate Vladimir Prelog, who makes the point that chemistry takes a unique position among the natural sciences, for it deals not only with materials from natural sources, but creates the major part of its objects by synthesis. In this respect, the potential of its creativity is terrifying. And so the point I want to make here is that I realized about this time that chemistry gave me the same opportunity to express myself if I had been a painter or a sculptor, if I had been a Picasso or an Epstein, if I had been a composer or a novelist, if I had been a Beethoven or a Dickens or whatever. It's the same kind of thing. You are given stuff and you make things. And so my research, to summarize this period, 70-78, was the marriage of crown ethers with carbohydrates. I was learning to be imaginative. I was going through my first 10 years, 10,000 hours, as many people have commented. And then I met another amazing American chemist, Don Cram, again from UCLA. And I spent, after meeting him in New York in 1976 and finding that he was supportive, 3 months in his lab at UCLA at the beginning of 1978. And he knew that I was having a difficult time at Sheffield, and he made it possible, the then Science Research Council and Imperial Chemical Industries, to support a 3-year secondment to ICI. And I went to the ICI corporate laboratory in Runcorn in Cheshire, near Liverpool, where the Beatles come from. And here you are. Here's Don and his wife, Jane. This was many years later in 1991 when we organized a conference about the time I left Sheffield to go to Birmingham. All right, so let me then go to some science, and let's look at the noun bond, because it means different things to different people. Chemists by no means have a monopoly on this word. Financiers use it, biologists use it, social scientists use it, anthropologists use it. And if I put the adjective mechanical in front of bond, it's not exclusive to chemistry. It's prevalent in our daily lives, in nature, art, architecture, and so forth, and particularly in my Celtic culture. And on a more light-hearted basis, of course, we have James Bond, of which the first was a Scot, Sir Sean Connery. So, now just a little bit of an introduction to the chemistry you're going to hear about. We introduced, at a practical level, along with Jean-Pierre Sauvage, my co-laureate, what I call the mechanical bond. And this is expressed at its simplest level by 2 interlocked rings, which is called a catenane, or a dumbbell with large stoppers at the end, a rod on which a ring is strapped. So catenanes and retaxanes, I've referred to those as mechanically interlocked molecules, or MIMs for short. And a retaxane is a situation where you have a molecular species. That's the most important thing. We're back into a molecular world, having used self-assembly and molecular recognition. And I put across here this abacus just to let your minds think about what could happen if you could get this ring to move at a molecular level. Derived from Latin. Again, a catena is the word in Latin for a chain, and so this is why this is called a 2-catenane. And you're well familiar with this symbol in Brazil. You hosted this Olympics Games. You can tell me which year it was. 16, 26, it's quite recent, yeah. Remarkably, you did a great job. So this could be a 5-catenane, all right? Okay, so now I go to ICI, the corporate laboratory for 3 years, from 78 to 81. And this was a complete breath of fresh air. Very talented young scientists, extremely well equipped, highly collaborative. People were working together in teams. I joined a big group of 70 people doing catalysis, and I met a young scientist there that I'm going to introduce you to, Howard Colquhoun. And we got involved in an area of science called second sphere coordination, which then gave way to using 2 of ICI's wipeout weed killers, diquat and paraquat. And so you're beginning to see how bizarre this journey becomes, particularly during this period in ICI corporate laboratory. And another person who was incredibly important to establishing the mechanical bond was a crystallographer, David Williams, at Imperial College London. And the other thing that I picked up from being in industry was some management skills that I clearly had not managed to get under my belt as an academic. All right, so let me introduce diquat and paraquat, and it's principally paraquat that's going to be dominant in my story from here on. But they are both, and were marketed for many years as a 50-50 mixture by ICI, kill a wide range of grasses and broadleaf weeds in a very quick period of time, and they can withstand rain like today in Curitiba and like most days in Scotland, and they are inactivated when they hit the soil. And so how did we get to diquat and paraquat? Well, it was an interest in this research by Alfred Werner, a Swiss chemist, who had brought first sphere coordination of transition metals, things like iron and zinc and copper, and put organic ligands around them. And for his contribution to science, he was the 1913 Nobel laureate in chemistry. And his disciple in the UK was a man called Joe Chatt. And Joe Chatt had spent much time at ICI, and here's a bit of philosophy from him. Scientific discovery is not yet predictable. If you have an exciting road to follow, do not be put off by those who say there's nothing at the end of it. They do not know. Persevere and enjoy the excitement of exploring the unknown. So here's Howard. He was younger at the time. He's just retired from the University of Readington. And here is the crystallographer, David Williams, and the student, now at St Andrews University, that carried out a lot of the research which he did in the area of second sphere coordination. So, what was that? Well, that was taking this platinum complex here. So this is what we call a bipyridyl ligand. These are 2 ammonias. And we found that if we took one of Pedersen's large crown ethers, now there's 30 atoms in the ring, 10 of which are oxygens, and there's a couple of benzene rings, so dibenzo 30 crown 10. It wound its way around in a sort of horseshoe-like fashion round this transition metal complex. And it didn't take much wit to say, well, if we took the platinum out, the metal out, and we just went to the weed killer, diquat, would the same happen? And yes, it did. So this was us on this journey that I took up on returning to Sheffield in 1981. And should I say, I was all for leaving academia and staying in industry. But sadly, the ICI corporate lab started to close down in 81, and then ICI itself crumbled very quickly after that. So back to Sheffield I went. Little had changed in the department, but I was more experienced. I was able to handle the politics that were going on. I was growing in confidence, and I decided not to be the shy little Scottish boy that I'd been up till then. I decided to criticize the system, having tested whether I would get the support of the administrators at Sheffield, and found not really. And so I wrote to the Times of London, the Manchester Guardian, Telegraph, and I made the point that at that time, in the 1980s, there was a lot of complaining in Britain about lack of funding for science. And I said, well, no, it's not that. It is really the corruption that's in the system, that the money is being held in the hands of a few people. I was not popular. In fact, I was very unpopular. And that was going to determine the fact that I would not ultimately be a professor until I was almost 50. So I criticized the system. The other thing that, amazingly, and in Brexit Britain at the moment, it comes back to haunt us, I hired foreign students. And this really annoyed the senior people. And I got the comment that still rings in my ear. Of course, our students are very much better. Well, this was poppycock. Students came in the first instance from Italy, Spain, Germany, France, and it was transformative. And I found supporters, particularly in the United States. Research thrived, and the stage was set for developing mechanically interlocked molecules. And the first catenane appeared on the scene in 1989. My wife and I ran conferences like no tomorrow, but by 1990 I was ready to leave and actually went to the University of Birmingham. But before we go there, back to some chemistry. So here was a very important macrocycle. Now it's a little larger than dB 30 crown 10. It's what we call a constitutional isomer. We've just moved these polyether loops from being so-called ortho, next door to each other on a benzene ring, to being opposite each other, para. And this turned out to be just a perfect home for this other weed killer, paraquat. So we could put blue inside red. This was molecular recognition at its best. And having done that, then we had to see, could we make something that was a blue container? And eventually, this one here, with two of these paraquat components, bridged by phenylene groups, became known as our little blue box. And we could put red things inside. So red are what we call pi electron rich, and blue are pi electron deficient, and they stick together. So that was the basis for the molecular recognition. And now I have a few movies just showing you how paraquat goes into this red ring. And then here is the blue box with something that's red going inside it. But in order to make this blue box, because it's a highly strained system, we used a template. And so we would use this thread containing a naphthalene unit and then extract it afterwards to increase the efficiency of making the blue box. And against that background, by the late 80s, we were able to take these two building blocks that are shown here chemically, neither of which interact with this red component, until a covalent bond is made here between nitrogen and carbon, and you switch on something that's like the paraquat. And so it worms its way inside this red ring, and these vertical lines show that we have a good, strong interaction, molecular recognition, and all we need to do now is complete another covalent bond, and we have not only molecular recognition across blue and red, we've got a mechanical bond. And the amazing thing about this experiment was that it was, in the first instance, a 70% yield. We can get it up to 100% now, but the first experiment was just a blowaway. Here's the crystal structure provided by David Williams. So from the northeast to the southwest, we've got acceptor, donor, acceptor, donor. And this was telling us that not only do we have two rings that are interlocked, but they're talking to each other. And the molecular recognition that we used to bring them together lives on afterwards. And this was going to be very important for the making of molecular switches and then molecular machines. Oh, here's a little bit of history. Someday Nature, the magazine, asked me if I had any doodles from that time. And here you can see some scribbles. This is the 2-catenane. Actually, the colors are reversed. We hadn't really sorted out, I guess, when I was doodling what color we were going to use. But there it is. It was in our minds, and we made it. Here was something else we made. Here was something else we made. and yet something else. So these were the days when we were just doodling and having dreams, coming into the lab with 39 different ideas and getting the best of them to work. So back with the movies, here is the movie that encapsulates the making of the 2-catenane. And having made it, you saw in the fact that the red and the blue speak to each other, that they're going to be controlled movements. So the first one is the rocking of the red ring with respect to the blue ring. And then another one is the pirouetting of the red ring round the blue ring. And we've no control over whether it goes clockwise or anti-clockwise. And then finally, this circumrotation of the red through the blue ring. And so that was all in the bag before we moved to Birmingham in 1990, where I had been headhunted by the then Vice Chancellor Sir Michael Thompson, a physicist. He made a huge investment to bring his chemistry department, which had been a great one many, many years before, back from almost the dead. And I became a professor, as I said, at almost 50. A supply of excellent students, many of them coming from other European countries and beyond. New laboratories, state-of-the-art equipment, research blossomed. And we had our first so-called molecular shuttle invented in 91, first molecular switch in 94, and Olympiadine, a play on the 5-catenane of the Olympic symbol, in 96. And again, I got my opportunity to be in a management situation as head of the School of Chemistry. Change was dynamic during that time. And the Birmingham Department of Chemistry been a center of excellence in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, thanks to this man, Haworth. And although he didn't ever get into this building, it was built in his honor and opened in 1965, years after he died. But again, there's far too much here. What I want to just pick out is the fact that he moved a lot. You can see St Andrews, you can see Newcastle, Durham, Birmingham, and then ultimately the one thing to point out here, he was in 1937 the first British organic chemist to receive the Nobel Prize for his synthesis of vitamin C, ascorbic acid, and also for his elucidation of the structure of polymers based on carbohydrates, so-called polysaccharides. And he established a fairly sizable school of carbohydrate chemistry that spilled over into the United States, Wales, Scotland, and also England. And it's often been commented within the Nobel Foundation that in many respects you stand a little bit of a better chance of being a Nobel laureate if you're in a lineage where there have been Nobel laureates before you. And so if we look at the situation in regard to Walter Nmr Haworth, he carried out his PhD in Germany with Otto Wallach, who was a 1910, I think, Nobel laureate in chemistry. And a little earlier than that, I've just forgotten the date, but somewhere between 1901 and 1910, Wilhelm Ostwald had been the place where James Irwin had taken his, I think, postdoctoral experience, and Irwin was also a mentor of Haworth, who, as I said, was a Nobel laureate in 1937. And many would have argued that my professor should have shared the prize, Edmund Hurst, with Haworth, but it didn't happen that way. And then I guess it skipped 2 people before it came back again. All right, so back to the chemistry. Here we have a degenerate so-called 2-ritaxane. So this is the same chemistry as you saw with the catenane, but now we're making this dumbbell-shaped molecule, and I've made the dumbbell shape like this so that I can write down the interactions, these vertical lines, showing that the non-covalent bonding comes in place during the formation of classical chemical bonds, and that you end up with a mechanically interlocked molecule, which if I straighten it out, which I think slightly lower yield, this is not such a good pre-organized template. Oh yeah, here's a movie just showing how it comes together. So this is the dumbbell component, that's the ring. And now if I stretch out the dumbbell, what you can see here is this blue ring jumps from this red station to this one. It's a degenerate process back and forth, and it's happening 2,000 times a second at room temperature. So that was a big breakthrough in '91, published in the Journal of the American Chemical Society. And here is the process picked out for you as a movie. The ring is just moving back and forth, spending half its time on this one and half its time on that red one. So a little story about how you sometimes have to be prescient about the importance of work that you've done. So these were the last 4 sentences in a very short communication. And I just pick out the second one. And I pick it out because the then editor of the Journal of the American Chemical Society said, take out all of it. It's hype. Okay? It's hype. Well, insofar as it becomes possible to control the movement of one molecular component with respect to the other in a 2-retaxane, the technology for building molecular machines will emerge. This was the first time in the literature that I mentioned molecular machines. So it was good, it was wise that I stuck to my guns and said, no, this is not hype. I want this to appear in the closing paragraph of this paper. The next thing that happened was that we replaced the 2 red units by a bigger red unit here and a green one, knowing that the green one, which is called benzidine, would be a better pi electron system than the red one, and so the ring would spend more of its time on the blue, on the green, the blue ring on the green, 84 to 16. So this was now a non-degenerate, if you like, molecular shuttle, but it was more than that, and let's just look at the fact that it spends very little time on the red, most of its time on the green. But it was also a prototype for a molecular switch, because we could come along and simply add protons, which meant positive charge, onto these nitrogens, and physics comes into being. The positively charged ring with 4 is not going to sit on the one station here with 2, and so it all moves across here in the presence of acid. And if we add base, it will go back to the 84-14 situation. So now we have this molecular switch where when we add acid, goes here, and when we add base, comes back to this site. All right, so by this time you can see the research group had grown to a very large size, and you can just see from the facial expressions, Indian, Japanese, Italian, German, Czech, Russian, German, Australian, and so on. It was very, very a multinational group of people, and this is where the present politics of the United Kingdom do not go down well with me. This was total magic, bringing people from all around the world. Eventually at UCLA I had an incredibly talented Brazilian girl, and I'm going to Fluminense, thank you, on Wednesday to give a presentation. She's there now, a professor. Okay, so here is Olympidine, the molecular level, the 5 rings picked out with the symbols of the colors of the Olympic rings. So blue, yellow, black, green, and red. And the molecular situation is the blue and the red are the same constitutionally, and the yellow and the green are the same, and the black is a little bit unique. And this is just another way of portraying it, showing that these rings all come together when they can speak to the recognition units. And the only point I want to make here is that this was something we were able to do because in some respects we are looking at interactions that are the same as in our DNA, And these are the interactions that are going in this direction, where these separations of a 3.5 roughly angstroms are the same as you get in DNA, and then these green ones are what you find in proteins that are rich in aromatic amino acids. And so the same weak interactions allow you to make these totally unnatural molecules. So I moved to UCLA at the age of 55 in 1997. It's a steep learning curve. I say to myself, Fraser, you're an assistant professor. You're starting again in another academic system. But now I have very supportive colleagues, and collaborations thrive. I become ultimately director of the California Nanosystems Institute. It is a highly productive time in research, much traveling, but the reason that, one of the reasons I went to UCLA was my wife had breast cancer starting in '92, and you'll see therefore it was a 12-year battle. And in some extent we moved to UCLA so that she could have the treatment provided by the Breast Cancer Center at UCLA, which was absolutely wonderful. And of course, it took me into drug delivery systems, into molecular electronics, and the drug delivery work was done in collaboration with Jeff Zink. He was, and still is, adept at creating silicon nanoparticles that are riddled with long nanometer-sized cavities into which you could feed drugs. And we put our rotaxanes on the outside, and they acted as gates that could be closed when the rings were close to the cavity and open when they were further away. And so we had a way of controlling drug delivery. And this is shown in this movie here. So under a concentration gradient, this could be a drug going into the capsule. You close the gates, and in the best scenario, the outside of the nanoparticle has epitopes that will take the nanoparticle to diseased cells in preference over healthy cells, and they will enter therein by a process of endocytosis. And if the drug is then released, then it's going to be bad news for the cell. So that was research that was ongoing at the UCLA time, as was in collaboration with Jim Heath. And Jim Heath was the graduate student that probably discovered C60 at 3 in the morning when he was at Rice as a student with the late Rick Smalley, who was a 96, I think, Nobel laureate in chemistry. And so here you see what's called a crossbar device. These are just wires that are running horizontally and vertically. And at the junction points, there was trapped several hundred of these switchable rotaxane molecules. And this is put together. And here you see the synthesis of the rotaxane in terms of, as it were, these models. This is a green component where the ring likes to sit, so this is the one around which it sits and is made. But you can, as it were, oxidize it and put positive charge, and so you can make the ring go here, and then you can reduce it and come back. And the situation is that the conductivity across the molecule changes as you do that so-called redox chemistry. And in Jim's lab, he was a wizard at doing nanofabrication at the so-called hard level. And this is something called a ionotrough, where you put the molecules and you press them together with a barrier, and it is a monolayer. And then you lift out this set of wires, and it is coated with the molecules. And when you see one of these, then there's several hundred represented, but that would be difficult to show. And then at right angles, other wires are put in place. So this is a 4x4 or 16 kilobyte or 16-bit, memory. And from there, we went on to produce something that was much larger, 160 kilobyte memory, and that was used. And here is the device here. It's smaller than the cross-section of a white blood cell. That was used to print out California Institute of Technology, because my colleague had moved to Caltech by that time. And there's the device, and these are the white blood cells. And this was 2007. We were roughly 13 years ahead in terms of the size of device for comparison with the semiconductor industry of today. All right, so here is the first of two, what I call bolts out of the blue. So somebody in the same position as you, Joe, Bob Pierce, telephoned me on the 13th of November. The letter came on the 14th to tell me that Prime Minister Tony Blair in the UK had it in mind for me to be given an honour. And I was, of course, expecting this. I wasn't expecting this, but if I was going to get an honour, it would be quite a small one. But he said, no, it's a knighthood. And I said, oh, wow. So my whole past went in front of me, because I hadn't always been a monarchist, shall we say. And so he said, you've got to decide here and now if you'll accept it. And many have not accepted knighthoods over the many, many hundreds of years. Anyway, I decided I should accept it. And so this is the letter that followed. And then the research group, when it was announced on the 1st of January 2007, put together this little ditty that I'm going to use to give myself a rest and hope you enjoy. It is When I'm 64, which was my age at that time, Paul McCartney and John Lennon, and here we go. Well, I hope that gave you a snapshot of what life is like. I'm just an ordinary person. That's the message that I have to get over to the young people. All right, so maybe you want to hear what my late wife would say about me. She wasn't the sort of wife that was incredibly supportive of her husband, and we would often be in the presence of other academics, and their wives would, if they were talking about their husbands as professors, would be extolling the virtues and the wisdom of their husbands. She was somewhat different. And so here's some of the comments that are ringing in my ears. So she was my fiercest critic. It is well seen you were brought up on a farm. You can't go anywhere to eat, but you get your food all over you. I sometimes wonder why I married you. That slide has far, she was a biochemist, by the way, has far too much information on it. I would get rid of most of it. 90% of what you have there is redundant. Yeah. And so I leave you to guess, just as I have to, what would she say if she was around today? Anyway, all of this led in ultimately 2007 to meeting with this lady here. I call her the Queen of Scotland because England isn't my favorite country at the moment. And her Lord Chamberlain, if you know Shakespeare, he is always appearing. His head is cut off here, but he eventually says, may I present Your Majesty Fraser Stoddart for services to chemistry and nanotology. Wow. Okay, I'm in a very cold sweat. I've got this sharp knife on my right shoulder, and I'm wondering what's going to happen when we're face to face. And she says, he got that wrong, didn't he? Smart. She got it right. And she answered herself. Or I said, he certainly did, Your Majesty. And she came out with, what should it be then? Nanotechnology. She got it right. And I told her she had. And she said it's about very small things. And again, I agreed with her and gave her a comparison with human hair. And then just to show you that she'd done her homework, exceedingly small, you work in America now, I'm told. And again, I said, I agree with that. And that was my 15 seconds of interaction with Queen Elizabeth II. Okay, so now I'm at Northwestern from 2008 onwards, and all of that is going extremely well. A second book appears, which we'll come to in a minute. And so the grand challenge now is to make machines, because switches are just on and off, they're not machines. And so I say here artificial molecular switches are a dime a dozen or 10 a penny. Artificial molecular machines are few and far between because they need to perform work on their immediate environment. So assembling and controlling them synergistically, housed in highly interactive and robust architectural domains, holds a game changer for chemical synthesis and a defining moment for nanofabrication. And so back to our movies. Here we're now using another sort of chemistry where you see a dot. This is a lone electron, and the whole system takes on a purple connotation. And when they're purple, they like each other. And this led to the design of a so-called molecular pump. And this is the pump portion here. The ring comes on from the left-hand side, goes over a steric barrier, and is collected on this chain. And you can see this happening with this movie down here in the bottom left-hand corner. Here's another movie that shows that once the rings are coming on, they're brought on under what are called reduction conditions, oxidation, and then thermal energy to get over the speed bump, and they're collected here. And now we are actually making a system that is a machine, because we are collecting these rings that don't like each other, and the energy is going up. And this is just a layout of the process: reduction, oxidation, thermal energy to get one ring on, and then repeat it to get a second one on. This is the chemical constitution, and we were able to follow it by so-called Proton Nmr spectroscopy. So we do the redox cycle, then we have to wait an hour and a half. These signals tell us that the ring has gone onto the chain here, and we repeat it, and these signals tell us that a second ring has come onto the chain. So here's a movie that is showing that under reduction conditions, the ring is brought on from here, oxidized, and heat treatment. And the point is that this speed bump stops the first ring coming back. So it's a very subtly defined system. And so now we're pumping rings onto polymer chains, not using chemicals, but using electricity. And it looks something like this. So they're coming on and they're getting crowded onto something like polystyrene or polyethylene glycol. And now I have another movie. Is it all right to have 4 minutes to show this? Thank you. So I hope you enjoy this as much as the last one. This is a summary of the 35 years of research that went into making molecular machines. So 35 years. So, Becky, I need to take your cue. I have no regrets. Do you want me to stop there? I will 5 or 10 minutes more. We should stop there then. So, yes, let's do that. So, again, let me just ramp up and say I have no regrets. It's been a wonderful journey. Life is not a bowl of cherries. You saw the ups and downs, both at a personal level and at a professional level. But when you look back on it, it is a question of being able to cope with failure just as much as with success, with the bad things in life, along with the good things in life. And so when I integrate over the last 76 years or so, I've been very fortunate. Been incredibly fortunate to have interacted with something like 500 young people from 50 different countries over 50 years. That has been so enjoyable, and that is my memories, along with, of course, my closeness to my family. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Fraser. That was both scientific and personal. It was a lovely, lovely lecture. Thank you. So we have some time for questions from the audience. Please, I encourage you to use this opportunity. So please put up your hand if you have a question, and we have microphones going around. Anybody want to? Good. Please.
Hello, Professor. Thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting. My question is regarding what is your next step? I mean, you have received the Nobel Prize, and now what are you going to do? And the second question is about the molecular machines. There is a question if we keep studying them in a nanoscale or we should study them in a micro scale. What do you think?
Okay, so let me take the second question. First of all, I think we will see amazing applications of these nanoscale artificial molecular machines interacting with the microscale cells in our bodies. I dream of a situation, and I don't think it's going to be overnight, but one where we see the advent of molecular prosthetics, where we see these machines being used in a dynamic way to deliver, if you like, a sensible place to start would be drug delivery, since I've been talking about that. Drugs to a disease cell, not only in a sort of passive way, using epitopes and all the rest of it, but then in a driven sense, you know, almost like a drill in a microscopic world going through the membrane of a cell. So since I'm in an audience, I think, of medical people, I see that as a long-term goal. In the meantime, the artificial molecular machines are making an impact on material science and also on chemistry itself. What about myself? Okay, so my life has changed. Out of all recognition, I had 3 days in the whole of March back at base, namely at Northwestern University. I'll have maybe 5 if I'm lucky in April. And so I still have a large research group, but they join in the knowledge that they do their own thing, that they're given freedom within a remit of certain topics to carry out research that they think of themselves. And I come into their loop when they have something ready to present, to publish. So I'm giving that sort of independence to people at Northwestern, also in Tianjin University in China, and also at the University of New South Wales. So I see myself now as an enabler for young people to have the freedom that I think is so important to do creative work when they're still in their late 20s and 30s. So that is how I'm dedicating my time. I'm no longer saying that it's all about And it never has been all about me. It's been about us and them.
Yes, please. Oh, okay. All right, go there first. It's fine. And then there. Okay, fine.
Okay. First of all, thank you very much for your presentation and your conference. I would like to know about your some personal advice. What would you advise for young students who would like to make a great mark on the world, to give something better and great for the world?
So the advice, it was on a later slide that I didn't get to because we ran out of time, would be along the following lines. So if you want to make your mark on science as a research scientist, somewhere along the line you have got to have the courage to walk away from what I call the beaten track. There is always the incentive to follow in the footsteps of the great and good that have gone before you. And to some extent, maybe during your first 10 years, that's fine. You're serving your apprenticeship. You're finding out how to tackle the day-to-day business of doing science. But somewhere in the second decade, I think you have got to say to yourself, I need to break away and do something that is different. And here I will come out with another cliche. I don't think there are any firsts in science, but there are certainly situations where people have dared to go before you. Perhaps they've not had the technology to be able to advance the subject. And this whole business of the mechanical bond is an excellent example of that. There were early players, particularly a man called Gottfried Schill in Germany, who did wonderful things, but it was never going to be successful because it was 22, 24-step synthesis. It was too long, too involved. It had to be much shorter. It had to be simpler. And so my co-laureate Jean-Pierre Sauvage came up with molecular recognition using transition metals. We came up with molecular recognition without the transition metals, just with the organic components. And so, I would illustrate it with reference to, I found out about the second decade of my research, and once I had my eye on, you can do this, Fraser, I was following in the advice of my professor, Stoddart, tackle a big problem. And I think his definition of that was what I'm trying to tell you, that it is something that has not been looked at seriously and been given a satisfactory scientific answer. So go there with all the knowledge that you've gained at that time and keep up to date with all the new techniques that are coming out. This is very important. And tackle that big problem. And you will know when you're being successful. Two things will happen. You get a great surge of satisfaction yourself, but expect some criticism from your, as it were, community, because you're upsetting the apple cart. And so we came in for some criticism using color, doing things that people said, well, it's exotic, but it can't be useful for anything. You're not put off by that. You just keep going. And one day, you'll find uses for these exotic and crazy things.
You emphasized several times during the talk your own movement and how many times you move between places. How important is it for young people, do you think, to keep moving?
Okay, well, there are two takes on that. You can stay in the same place virtually for a lifetime. So Nobel laureate Don Cram is a good example. He was, I guess, 50 years at UCLA, and his dramatic change was at age 50, roughly, he told his students and postdocs, we're stopping everything we're doing, and we're going to enter this new area of research. And he told me sometime afterwards that he had to take that very dramatic line and say, no more of what you're doing, we're going to do something new. And this is when he entered the area of host gas chemistry, as it was called, and ended up being one of the co-laureates with Pedersen and Jean-Marie Lane in 1987. My co-laureate Jean-Pierre Sauvage spent all of his time, and Ben Feringa, the two of them, one at the University of Strasbourg and one at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. I'm the exception in that year of the, as it were, what do I call myself? People that move all the time. Peripatetic scientist that moves from Scotland to Canada to England to the United States and then branches out to China. And I think that's something to do with the Scottish background. I knew when I was maybe 12 or something like that I wasn't going to stay in Scotland. You know, it's a small country, gives you a good education, but there wouldn't necessarily be an opportunity to do something at home. So I'll just tell you that when I went to Canada, and remember, I'm an only child, I'm an only son, my mother could have been heartbroken. No. She was on her phone to all her friends saying, "Oh, Fraser's gone to Canada." That's the way it was.
Thank you. Question over here, please.
Hi, Professor Fraser. I am Carolina Rincus. I am a radiologist, and I loved your lecture. I was fascinated by it, but I'm sorry that I didn't understand everything. But what I'd like to know is that I understood that with nanotechnology you want to make molecules better and more efficient and more specific for some target. And I'd like to understand better this thing about the paraquat and GQuat, what really changed in the way of the act, and also if you could give an example during your lifetime of a molecule that you modified that and you think that it really it was really a good modification and a good discovery, and how it affected I don't know, the action of a molecule.
Okay. So you want to comment about paraquat and diquat. The story there is, you know, I end up going to ICI because I'm, to some extent, escaping a culture in academia that I wasn't finding comfortable. And lo and behold, I get presented with two weed killers that become, particularly one of them, paraquat, the building block for my molecular shuttles, my molecular switches, and ultimately my molecular machines. It has been all pervasive. There's been, from our own lab, probably 1,000 publications as a result, and of course many other people have followed in our wake and used these building blocks. So we use the term paraquat, or I do, because that was my meeting with it. It also goes under the descriptor of methyl-viologen. And methyl-viologen is all pervasive in solar cell systems and many other applications in science. So we don't have, as it were, a complete monopoly on that particular compound. It has served the purposes of many researchers in chemistry and material science, and probably in physics as well, over the years. Your second comment, I think, was leading to where I've got satisfaction from something that might have application to it. And so a story I have not been able to tell is that since I went to Northwestern, and I want to get over here, we're not a one-trick pony. There are many other things going on. And in 2010, we made a discovery that is now the basis for a startup company that has put skincare products on the market. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. There could be applications in other parts of personal care, home care, pharmaceuticals, food chemistry, petrochemicals, and this is all around a metal organic framework, as it's called, built up of donuts of starch that have 8 sugar units in them, which form these units with potassium ions cubes, And then other potassium ions give an extended structure. And if you come up afterwards, I'll give you a sample of our skincare cream so that you can see that it is for real. And what I find very exciting is that this launch, which has been just online for 1 year, has been so successful that a second company, the company that we formed is called Panacea Nano. A second company called Beauty Molecules has been brought in, who are going to spend, believe it or not, $100 million a year for 3 years to become #1 in a hugely competitive market of beauty products. And I find this very, very exciting. As you know, the bystander looking on, it's nice to see that something comes out of your lab that is going to be welcomed by many in society, particularly women, but secondly could be a great money generator. And if it is, it's not to make Fraser Stoddart wealthy. It is so that I can form the Stoddart Foundation, and this is a big dream, and then pump a huge amount of money back into science worldwide.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, you see, there's a reward for asking a question. She gets a sample of skin cream. So we have only a couple of minutes left, but there's a chance to ask a last question. Come on. Great. Thank you. Yes, please. Just. Thank you.
Morning, Professor. It's an honor to be here, and I would like to ask you, trying to make a breakthrough. We have this problem that everyone doubts about what you're doing. What's the thing that keeps you in the right way to discover the point to believe, but everyone doubts about it?
Well, how do you keep going when you're going for something that everybody else is doubting? Everybody else doubts you can do it, but you keep your self-belief somehow.
Yes, well, to me that was an impetus. I was old enough and maybe wise enough by that time to realize, and I'd read books on creativity, that if you are a creative person, and most of these books will bring out the same line, you are not going to be acceptable by and large by your community. You are going to be a target for criticism and for people to make negative comments. And so you need to, I've often said, 3 things to be successful as a scientist: to have the strength of a horse. So you need good health, which means you have got to eat well. You have no problem in Brazil. You all eat very well. You need the hide of an elephant, i.e. the skin of an elephant. You need to be able to take all the criticism that comes your way and just let it, not impinge on you, just let it flow over you. And even if it's happening on social media, ignore it. And then if you know what's going on, it's almost a feeling that, yes, you're onto something, because this is sadly human nature in many ways, that you will come under attack until a certain time that you get more and more recognition. And then, of course, if Stockholm speaks, then that really does remove all the sort of criticism for the most part. People are then much more magnanimous and are much more accepting, by and large. Although I have to say, I still have people from my days in Sheffield who are a little older than me attacking me on social media. And I don't know why, other than maybe it's just they're resentful or whatever. So you're never free of that sort of situation. But I think you capitalize on the support that you get from family and from your student body and from most of your collaborators, if you see what I'm saying. And I had many collaborators and many, many supporters. So they were the people that I listened to. And the detractors, I sort of said, well, don't take them too seriously.
Yes. Yeah. And just to finish, the third thing: strength of a horse, hide of an elephant.
And the work ethic of a honeybee. So if you're onto something that is incredibly, in your eyes, important, don't think that you can make a demonstration of its worth 1 or 2 times. No, think about doing it 10, 20, 100, 200 times. Make the statement such that it's not going to be lost on the scientific community. So that's why I say the work ethic of a honeybee. And it's very easy to work hard once you're on a successful ride. So you just push the advantage. But there is the other side, of course. You have to cope with failure, and that's another time when you also work hard. So you work hard when you're successful, and you work hard when you are facing failure.
Or indeed the work ethic of an adventurous Scotsman.
Well, there we are.
Thank you very much indeed, Sir Fraser.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Fraser, for this inspiring talk and discussion. And now that our event is coming to an end, we would like to take some time to thank all the parties involved in the organization and the production of this event, especially AstraZeneca and Nobel Media. So to our guests and the audience from USP IPTV, may I thank you very much for your presence here and to being here and contributing to the great discussion that we witnessed today. So thank you and have a good week, everybody.
Oh, I didn't put it on video. I'm a very stupid Nobel laureate. Can we do that again? Good. I have one story that about 4 weeks ago I was in Paris in connection with the skincare cream, being an actor. And for 2 days there was a villa with an office and a chemistry laboratory, and then we were on the outskirts of Paris, walking beside lakes and visiting forests, and I was hugging trees and things. And the one word that resounds in my mind from that 2 days is cut. So for any reason under the sun, it could be that you had fluffed your lines, but more likely the lighting wasn't right or something was wrong. We had to go back to the beginning, back to the beginning, back to the beginning. So I have great respect now for artists, for actors and actresses, how they actually, go through all this movie making. I don't know. It's they deserve a huge amount of respect.